Unfold your tinfoil hats and use them to wrap some leftovers or something. Seriously. Hello everybody and welcome! Lately I've been noticing a surge of negative comments regarding Kerbal Space Program 2. I'm saying surge because there has always been a baseline of sorts when it comes to negativity and sometimes outright hate targeted towards the game and the development team ever since KSP2 was launched into early access roughly a year ago. We'll talk about why in a second, and I'm also going to address 5 of the most common types of negative comments people left below my videos. And at the end we'll talk about some of my own feelings about all of this. If you're interested in how the development of Kerbal Space Program 2 goes, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this channel? I often do deep dives into specific updates, highlight some of the problems in software development and, when given the chance, conduct interviews with the team. There's a link to my most recent interview with creative director Nate Simpson in the box up top and in the video description. Alright. Let's not beat around the bush, but get right to the most severe of accusations some of you levy against the developers.
It's a scam!
Or is it? Let's do this the scientific way and start at the basics. What exactly is a scam? Well, various dictionaries tell us it is synonymous with fraud. Basically, it means tricking people into giving you money without providing something in return, or at least not something adequate. Broken down a bit further, you could call it a form of theft. Since these definitions, fraud and theft, have very concrete legal implications, you will never hear me lay any definitive claims that the company responsible for publishing Kerbal Space Program 2 has scammed or defrauded people that purchased the game. I cannot afford that kind of legal fees. All that aside, do you guys really believe there's a concerted effort that has been ongoing for 6 years now, where dozens of people over the course of these 6 years produce a piece of software and after the first early access release continue to work on multiple bug fixes and content updates just to have people buy a game? Was the initial early access release of KSP2 disappointing? Yes. Was it fraudulent? I would strongly argue no. This would be the world's most inefficient scam in history. It's really the opposite of a get-rich-quick scheme. Neither was it quick, nor did they get rich, but more on that later. First, let's compare it to a recent example of a game that was criticized for potentially being a scam. The Day Before. It was promoted as a revolutionary MMO survival game. The developers even claimed that they reinvented everything back when it was announced in January 2021. But almost 3 years later, the game that was finally released to the public this past December was a far cry from what was originally promised. Not just in regards to quality, but also in regards to the actual gameplay mechanics. In addition to that, the studio responsible almost immediately shut down and the founders disappeared. If you want to learn more about this, there's a very detailed history over on Wolf's gaming blog. I'll link to it in the video description. Even with all the shady things highlighted in that detailed account, it's still not clear if The Day Before was a concerted effort to scam anyone or just gross incompetence by the studio's leadership. Personally, I think this is where Hanlon's razor comes in. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Now, compare that catastrophe of a game to KSP2. It has been much longer in development than The Day Before, meaning ongoing costs for personnel, office space, hardware, software licenses, etc. across multiple years. Let's just take salary. If we calculate an average of $100,000 per year per developer and assume just 20 people, that would mean $2 million a year, totaling costs at already $12 million that KSP2 has to make up by selling to the public. There are various estimations regarding how many people have actually bought it so far, ranging from 230,000 to 470,000. Given the price of $50, that means that Kerbal Space Program 2 has raked in somewhere between $11.5 and $23.5 million. but we don't know how many people have refunded the game, and that assumed 12 million I mentioned is just salary for 20 people. There are surely more people working on the game in total. Now add to that the aforementioned additional costs like office space plus electricity, heating, food, coffee, then hardware costs. I mean, developers have to code on something, right? Software licenses, marketing and PR, social media, travel expenses, etc. They would be lucky if they have broken even yet, which I personally doubt. Scams usually are get-rich-quick schemes. This, folks, is not it. Even if the publisher's intent had been to recoup the losses by tricking people into buying the game, it would make no sense for them to continue working on it after it was released. Unfold your tinfoil hats and use them to wrap some leftovers or something. Seriously. Also, in stark contrast to the day before, Kerbal Space Program 2 has never claimed it would be something that it turned out not to be. The quality of the software is a completely different matter, we'll touch on that later, but the essence of the release was in line with what they communicated in their roadmap prior to the early access release. It would just be sandbox and core gameplay. Science would come later, which it did in December, then the rest of the content like colonies, interstellar progression and multiplayer, all of which we are still waiting for. And the biggest difference to the day before, almost a year after version 0.10 came out, KSP2 is still around and development is still ongoing. By the way, I plan on doing a 1 year later video next week, so that subscription I mentioned earlier is going to pay off for you. Okay, now that we have addressed the most severe of the negative comments, let's move on to the next one.
The new devs suck.
This is something that gets to me on a personal level because I work in software development myself and know a lot about the difficulties of inheriting products or onboarding new developers. Newsflash: every new developer will suck at first, and every developer will make mistakes in their software. Multiple times. It is an unavoidable fact of the industry. But what really baffles me is the ignorance of these types of comments. New developers? People from the KSP1 dev team have transitioned to KSP2. People like producer Nestor Gomez or engineer Marcos Salcido, who were even featured in a couple of the official feature episodes. Also, some of the most prolific modders of the original Kerbal Space Program are now part of the team, like Chris Adderley, also known as Nertea, or David Tregoning, who under his pseudonym TriggerAU made two of my all-time favorite mods for KSP, Kerbal Alarm Clock and Transfer Window Planner. And then of course there's Gassen Lamar, who is better known in the community as BlackRack, the modder who created the fantastic Scatterer mod and who has improved Kerbal Space Program 2's atmospheric visuals immensely. So yes, while there are a lot of new faces at Intercept Games, the studio developing KSP2, there is still continuity with the original by having veterans of KSP1 deeply involved. So basically, if you say the new devs suck, then you're saying that the old devs suck as well. But if that's the case, why do I always keep seeing the next thing?
KSP1 is better.
As a complete offering with all planned features available and a relatively stable codebase, yes, the original Kerbal Space Program is better. It's also not going away. It's still available to buy, including the DLCs which elevate the core gameplay by adding the mission planner and, more importantly, ground science and robotics. No, you cannot do cool things like this in KSP2. And maybe we never will, because robotics is not on the roadmap as far as I've been able to find out, which is a shame, I think. But putting all of that aside, KSP1 is still a flawed game. Without mods, the graphics look dated, which is to be expected since the game is over a decade old and some of the UI paradigms are annoying, like having bright green text without a background, which results in it not being legible in some situations. It is more stable though, and it is less of a hassle to run on less powerful systems, once you suffer through the multiple-minute-long loading screen. But then again, KSP2 is still in early access and development has not finished yet. It is just not a fair comparison when looking at the lifetime of each product. And as shocking as this may come to some of you, in many areas KSP2 is already better than its predecessor. A couple of months ago I did a video titled 5 Things Kerbal Space Program 2 does better than the original, and I still stand by what I said back then. I'm not going to go into details here, you can watch it by clicking the links up top or in the video description. In the end it comes down to personal preference. Do you prefer KSP1 over KSP2? Cool, more power to you. Are you the opposite and think KSP2 will in the end outshine its forerunner? That's fine as well. But I can't shake the feeling that a lot of the people writing these kinds of KSP1 is much better than KSP2 comments are trying to virtue signal, begging for upvotes, because it's the thing to do in the community right now. Or at least it was while the game was still a lot worse off than it is now. Me personally, I haven't touched the original since I started playing the For Science update for KSP2. Still, a lot of things could be improved, which leads to the next criticism I often see.
Performance sucks.
On the surface, this should be an objective thing that can be measured by FPS and other metrics. Unfortunately, that does not apply here, because for that to be true, everyone would have to launch the exact same rocket in the exact same way and at the exact same time with the exact same weather situation. The problem with measuring performance in both Kerbal games is that you can force the game to its knees by just smacking more parts onto it, making the physics engine work overtime trying to calculate each part's behavior. This problem is exacerbated when you use a lot of engines with the same fuel tank, something that KSP1 also suffers from. So with objective measurements kind of out of the window, what remains is the subjective experience all of us have with KSP2. But to be honest, the developers have contributed to the community feeling that the game's performance is subpar. A year ago there was genuine uproar when the initial minimum and recommended specifications for the first early access release were presented. And even with beefy systems, version 0.10 left a lot to be desired. Since then there have been 7 updates to the game, including a total of 102 items under the header optimizations, which is pretty much 10% of all fixes introduced to the game since the early access release. Does that mean any criticism aimed towards the performance of Kerbal Space Program 2 nowadays is unfair? No. While a lot has improved since the initial release, there is still more that could be done, and from what we already know, the developers definitely want to do more in this department. Me personally, I can perfectly live with the game's performance. I mean, I suffered through 10 seconds per frame launches in the original multiple times because I tend to bring the game engine to its knees with my creations. Also, KSP2 is not a game where frames per second will be the make or break point for enjoyment, as long as they stay above a certain minimum. Or you have the patience of a saint. Speaking of patience, there's another type of comment I regularly see.
I can't play this on...
Kerbal Space Program 2 is only available for Windows PCs at the moment, which prompts a lot of you complaining that you can't play it on Linux, Mac or on your console. And there's nothing really I can say against that. The developers have stated multiple times that they are focusing on Windows PC right now and want to release versions for Mac and Linux after the game has reached version 1.0, same for consoles. I feel for all of you out there that actually want to play KSP2 but can't because of the game not being developed for your platform. Yet. One of the original game's strong suits was how it supported different operating systems from early on. The first native Linux version was released in March 2013 when Kerbal Space Program 0.19 came out. Support for macOS 10 was even earlier. It came with version 0.10 in September 2011. From a production point of view, I can understand why Intercept Games wants to focus on Windows PC and port the game to consoles and other operating systems at a later date. Having to support additional platforms requires additional resources, and they want to move along with the main feature development first. Understandable, but still disappointing for all the original KSP1 fans on different operating systems. So, nope. No argument from me on this particular criticism. It's valid, and I hope they will come out with a version for Linux and Mac and consoles sooner rather than later. And with this, we're at the end of this roundup of the negative comments about KSP2 I see the most under my videos. Personally, I believe some of it is very valid, especially when it comes to the lack of support for other operating systems than Windows or when we talk about performance. But as I said right at the beginning, going around and calling the game a scam is just plain ignorant. And with this, I have probably lost a few subscribers that have fallen into the conspiracy rabbit hole. But if you watched until the end and haven't subscribed yet, maybe click that button below and also leave a like to let YouTube know that this content is something you enjoyed. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments or hop over onto my Discord server where we can have a chat. And if you really like what I'm doing, you can support my channel over on Patreon or become a YouTube member. As a bonus, you will receive access to videos earlier and can watch them ad-free on Patreon. Also, if you choose a higher tier, your name will be shown right here, like these wonderful people that believe in what I am doing. Next week, we will look at the past year of KSP2, the ups and downs, and where things might be headed next. You don't want to miss that. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.